Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Excellent. Looking forward to have a great conversation, and thank you very much for joining me. So let me start with an easy question. You can give me your 30-second elevator pitch about Baker Hughes, and we all know about the company, but tell us where do you see the company going in the near future?
Yeah, so if I give a 30-second elevator pitch on Baker Hughes, I think the first speaker talked about the fact that this isn't your father's company anymore. Maybe Baker Hughes is not the Baker Hughes of old that people know. So we're an energy technology company. We have technologies, services, and solutions that span the energy ecosystem and are oil and gas centric, but also serving industries across the globe: mining, marine, aerospace. And I think those are the things that people don't know about Baker Hughes today, that we have solutions that go beyond just oil and gas. And we're a people-first organization and committed to taking energy forward for people, the planet, and our future.
Absolutely. That was a great...
was that 30 seconds?
It was like 32, but you're fine. So, of course, the topic of the day of today's session is about flexibility in the workplace. And since the pandemic, the question is return to the office and what flexibility companies provide to its workers. And I was actually with a friend of mine who works for Boeing, and Boeing was one of the companies that actually mandated all employees to come to the office 4, even 5 days a week. So what do you do at the Baker Hughes in terms of flexibility?
Yeah. So I think the pandemic allowed us to really think about the art of the possible as it related to flexibility. And if you're going to be a flexible company, I think it starts with leadership. And our CEO is absolutely committed to flexibility in the workplace and really challenging our leaders to say, how do we tap into the best and brightest minds? And if we're not willing to be flexible in the way that we think about work, how are we ever going to attract and retain the workforce of the future? And so it's very challenging and difficult, but we have basically said the businesses really need to think about the flexibility that we need. And on a regional basis, we've created flexible solutions for all of our workers and the businesses to lean into. So anything from work from anywhere. So we have people doing jobs where there is no Baker Hughes office in the physical location they're in, all the way to people who actually their flexibility is coming into the office 4 or 5 days a week, because we have a lot of people, of course, who work on the manufacturing floor, but also people who like that in-person environment. So it's a mix of, we're trying out a mix of everything at the moment.
I totally agree with you. And even during the pandemic and even up to now, employees who will leave or want to leave, it's actually because of flexibility. So trying to provide that flexibility is very important. That's what we do in my organization. Slightly smaller than yours, but I think flexibility is quite important. Actually, the point I get from others saying that, I'm working on the manufacturing floor, on the field, especially in the energy sector. I have to be on an oil or gas platform. So how about those workers opposed to those in the office that have more flexibility? So how do you respond to that counterpoint?
Well, I think one of the things we have a tendency, specifically with rig workers, and I started my career in a field location, and so I saw people that were coming in, and those work environments, you're very inflexible when you're working. So I'm on a platform 28 days, but then I have 28 days off, and those 28 days, I'm not asked to come to the office, I have no responsibilities as it relates to work. Maybe I'm engaging from a continuous learning standpoint, but I don't think we talk about the beauty of those types of flexible schedules as well. My daughter actually worked on an offshore platform, and early in your career, the ability to take a month and go skiing or travel the world when you're not actually at work can actually be something that's very engaging. But I do think it is very difficult. And so one of the things that we've actually been investing in is a lot of automation and the ability to actually be in a situation where we can operate a lot of the things that are on the platform, but not actually being physically in those spaces, but actually in the offices, so that, again, we can provide a different type of flexibility out into the future. So during the pandemic, for example, we were able to actually, automate a number of drilling services that we had and get adoption from our customers to do that type of automated drilling where it is enabled by technology. And it's amazing to sort of see those leaps in terms of technology adoption when you have to go through that and then realize you can do work differently.
Absolutely. Well, actually, the automation you mentioned brings me to my last question, but let me ask right away. So, I mean, the notion of AI and automation, robotics, especially in oil rigs and some more dangerous jobs, is coming. So the question is, at least in my mind, is not if or when. So AI technology will ultimately change our jobs or take over our jobs depending on the job. So what is your take from an HR perspective across the whole variety of roles that you're overseeing?
That we have. So I actually just came back from last week. We do what we call annual meetings, so a meeting with all of our customers and clients in Florence, Italy. And I was part of a roundtable session with a number of leaders talking about how AI will actually impact the workforce. But then we also had a really great speaker. And for me, the interesting thing, if I think about, automation or artificial intelligence, is we think about it as displacing, as opposed to how do we use it to empower human potential. And I think we've become very comfortable with how automation allows us to work. I was thinking about my grandmother and how much time it would have taken her to wash clothes. And I threw a load of laundry in this morning while I was getting ready for work, and then all I have to do is decide whether it goes in the dryer or hang it. So those types of things that have created the ability for us to use our time differently feel very comfortable. Where I think as we begin to start to see some of the cognitive artificial intelligence, that feels less comfortable to us because we just haven't thought about how do we use it to actually optimize our time and the problems that we choose to solve. And I think that that's one of the things that the HR community really needs to lean into is how do we see that creating more opportunity for people and particularly knowledge work, and how does that help us offset maybe some of the wellness and mental health challenges that we've seen as people have maybe over-exercised the amount of knowledge work that they're doing. Again, we understand our physical limitations maybe more than our cognitive limitations.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this is my area of expertise, the AI. So I give talks throughout the world, and I talk about this very issue. So next time you have an event in Florence, please do invite me. But on a serious note, I tell exactly people that, of course, even on the cognitive jobs that increasingly complement or change existing higher level, even knowledge jobs. I mean, are jobs actually or tasks that actually we don't want to do. Even writing with ChatGPT, we realize we can actually write very well, or at least leverage and complement our skills to write better, to make the different cognitive calculations faster. But ultimately, it's actually, I tell people, well, we don't really want to work as much, especially the mundane, even cognitive or manual jobs. So I think it's for the better, and we have moved from the 5-day week, hopefully going to the 4-day week, and hopefully in our lifetime we'll see even a 3-day week. So that's something that for HR to master in the near future. But one thing I noticed on your website is the notion of the skills-based passport. So, and I also believe as an educator about competencies and skills, and actually we work with employers to identify what are the competencies from the functional, the hard skills, to the soft skills, communication, writing skills, speaking skills. So what is your sense, and how do you implement it at Baker Hughes?
Yeah, so it's been a journey for us because, I think the way that we've always thought about how do I understand my capability or experience to do work, it comes through the CV or the resume that most of us have grown up over the course of our careers, and that's been the standard, for decades. And as we sort of were evolving and thinking about how do we transition our workforce from the jobs and the industries of today, and how do we think about some of these new areas of practice? So how do I take someone who understands technology from one perspective in oil and gas and take them into something like carbon capture and storage or geothermal? And we start to see where it's like, oh, these skills apply here and they can also apply there, and then I know what the gap is to actually develop. So we think about it as part of a continuous learning journey. So rather than I got a degree, now I've done my learning, and now I'm going to maximize that over the course of my career. Here's a passport that I'm thinking about. How do I continuously add to that? And how can I then show the organization or other organizations that I have 60 or 70% of the skills that are required to do that job, and this is the piece to learn. I have one of my mentees is actually in so his career is in HR, plans to be in HR, but he's doing a rotation today in sales and commercial. And he was sharing with me that he said, at first, it seemed really daunting. He said, then you realize, wow, I use a lot of skills in HR that actually apply in that sales environment. And so the skills passport is just a way of us being able to document and ensure that across the organization you see how that's used or learned. And I start to think about it as the head of HR of saying, we talk about productivity. And I think when you're working, there's these moments of time where you're like, I have spare capacity. And if you know my skills, then you can say, well, I have these tasks, and maybe at some point we get to the point where there's an app, and it's like, well, I can do a drop-down menu, and I can complete something different for the organization. And I start to think about that because in our daily lives, I've taken an Uber where I was driving with someone. I said, how long have you been driving Uber? And he said, oh, I'm just driving to work. He said, I just turned on the Uber because, I don't want to be lonely while I'm commuting to work. And I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then I was also with someone recently in an elevator where they were at their apartment and they said they were a little bored, and so they pulled up, that app, and they were just delivering food because they were like, I needed to go get takeout anyway. Okay. So when you translate that into the broader work environment, it's like maybe there's something I need help with in that particular day. And Baker Hughes is 57,000 people. If I can reach out to 57,000 people, someone there probably has an hour to help me, as opposed to not knowing or understanding, and then I'm overwhelmed with the work that I'm doing, as opposed to being able to actually source from the broader organization.
Very interesting. Actually, that's a very interesting approach, and also in the notion of lifelong learning and upskilling, and we always need to improve our skills, and especially with the AI, we always need to improve skills about using technology, automation. So I think what you're doing is very useful, because degrees, you get a degree at 22, 25, and then it's supposed to carry you for 40 years. It's not, it's a very outdated notion. Totally agree. So continuing education, executive learning are very important. But another thing I'd like to talk about is your employee resource groups. So could you please elaborate on those, please?
Yeah, so as an organization, we're of course committed. We operate in 80 countries around the world. We have 120 nationalities. We're very committed to inclusion, diversity, and equity. And so the employee resource groups are a way for us to create communities of like-minded people across the organization, for them to be able to come together, from whatever background they're from, and to be able to provide insights to the organization around, here are the ways that we could change or adapt as an organization so that we become more open and inclusive to those various groups. And I think it's also a way, again, in that hybrid working situation where we're not all physically in person, and so how do we instill culture? It really comes from creating these communities of employees who have the same purpose and desire to not only make the company successful, but also to be able to create connections with the people that they work with and learn from each other. So we have 8 specific employee resource groups, and then we have started to get into areas of interest, right? So as an example, one of our employee resource groups is the Women's Network, and one of the areas of interest is parenting. So not everyone in the women's group is a parent, and not everyone who is a male isn't also a parent. So, being able to bring those two things together and say, this is an area of focus. How can Baker Hughes do a better job of being an inclusive workforce for parents? What are some of the things that we should be thinking about with respect to our work schedules or the benefits that we offer? What would be interesting to parents, and how can they share resources around, well, this is how I make sure that I'm still growing and challenging myself in my work at the same time that I'm able to do a great job as a parent. So they've been incredible sources of information, and we have executive sponsors within them, HR, communications, so that we are able to tap into and really take those ideas that they generate forward. But I would say, even the amount of work that they're able, again, to do, we'll do a training course for you, we'll create this, we'll create that. It's just bringing people together and allowing them to do great work.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, actually, I have a harder question kind of related to this point, but I'd like to just say that, of course, the notion that you mentioned, inclusive leadership and trying to build the leadership skills is what we also strive to do at our school, and we work very closely with industry along these lines. But I mean, you mentioned DEI, and that's something that has come and gone in terms of being something positive, and it was embraced by companies, and in the last few years, I would say, especially in some areas of the country, maybe the United States, has been somewhat of a political, hot button issue. Of course, you operate in 120 countries, so basically this is more of a US-centric issue, but of course other countries have different aspects of DEI broadly defined. So what's your take both in the US, in Texas, given recent legislations here, in the US, and of course as a global company? How do you deal with these issues, and how do you create this inclusive leadership in your organization?
Yeah. So it's a topic that we discuss regularly as a leadership team. Our board actually spends a lot of time speaking to us as well, because the recent events in the US have made it, I would say, less of an area of focus. So where we come from is the research is clear, the data is clear. Diverse organizations, inclusive organizations outperform those that are not. So as a company that's committed to innovation and technology, we believe we want to tap into the broadest possible set of talent. So it's fundamental to how we think we differentiate ourselves through people. Then it becomes a matter of what is the focus, right? And for us, the focus has always been, when we've gone on this journey, is inclusion, and we see the diversity as an outcome of the focus on inclusion. Okay. So what we've really done is to focus our leaders on becoming inclusive leaders. So how do you adapt yourself as a leader? How do you adapt the work environment to be more conducive to what the future generations of workers are looking for? And that's where you come to something like flexibility and saying, I can resist it and continue to operate the way that I have, or I can say, how can I over time adapt myself so that in being a flexible work environment, I can continue to attract great people into the organization. And so because we're global, we're looking at it from that perspective, and that's where all of the resource groups we have one that's specifically multicultural. They're really looking at and adapting, what makes sense for that region of the world. What are the aspects that we need to think about based on what's going on in that particular country? In the US, like I say, our focus is really on inclusive leadership. A specific example, we train our leaders, or we have some training around how do you actually work with neurodivergent people. So I think we tend to think about diversity in very small buckets, and it's much, much broader than that, and that's why our focus has been on inclusion.
Absolutely. And inclusive leadership, as I mentioned, is our focus at the Bauer College of Business. We have an Inclusive Leadership Institute, and that's exactly what we're trying to do across the board. But we have less than a minute left, so I have kind of an easy question. So we're starting actually a master program in HR at the Bauer College. I have to do my plug as well about the program starting this year. But from an HR, why would someone go to the HR profession? What's exciting? What do you see the future? And is it a career that you would recommend to the next generation?
I have said to people recently that I wish I was starting my career in this moment. I think the next 20 or 30 years within the function are going to be absolutely incredible and amazing. So I think it comes back to what we're able to do with the integration of people and technology. It's going to be absolutely incredible what we're going to unlock in terms of human performance. And so I think there's no better place to be. I think for a long time as HR, we used to talk about how do we get a seat at the table. I think the seat is there, and I love the comment that you want the best possible person you can have sitting in that seat, because it's how we unlock just everything that we're capable of on the planet.
Actually, that's a great answer. So I'd like to just say that definitely it's all about people, even if about technology and AI will actually eventually affect our jobs. But I think in the foreseeable future, it's about complementing and leveraging technology, automation, robotics to do our jobs better and avoid the mundane things we don't want to do. So we have more time to do the interesting, exciting, innovative aspects. So I think we're out of time. So Deanna, thank you very much for a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much.